G'day viewers, it's Michael here again and welcome back to SingleRacer. Now just recently Mike Smith over at SimRacing 604 was kind enough to send me what you'd call, I guess, a promotional video that featured the F1 driver Lewis Hamilton guest spotting for, I guess, the PlayStation 4, showing off one of the cars and tracks for the recent game GT Sport. Now I'll have a link to that particular video in the description, but of course I watched it with interest, just generally trying to pick up any tips from his driving style and the way he put on the accelerator and brake and just his general approach to how he did the Hotlaps. But being a creature of habit, I just sort of picked up on what I could and just left it at that. And when I race personally online, I tend to race what used to be 2 but now is 3 main servers. So I'm talking about in Assetto Corsa the Bandito server, which is the Nordschleifer, the Japanese pack, which is also Nordschleifer, and now the new one, which is some fantastic servers featuring the new track Laguna Seca. Now occasionally I have seen a longer version of the Nordschleifer, which is the Nürburgring attached to it, so you race the whole lot as one big long race. But I came across a server that I'd never actually seen personally before, and it was the Nürburgring GP by itself, featuring the car that Lewis Hamilton drove. So, as well as a few other cars of course in that group, GT3 cars. So I thought I've got to try this, even though I wasn't that familiar with both the car and the track. So this is the Mercedes SLS GT3 car. I'm not very familiar with it. It's a great car to drive, very balanced. So it's kind of been added to my go-to cars now. But the track I knew even less, but it was such a benefit to actually just have previously watched Lewis Hamilton do it, so I knew automatically already what gears to take and how kind of to approach most corners, and I did know the track well enough that I didn't have to think about where I was going. Like I knew the track's layout, but I'd never really raced the track personally myself. And so naturally I recorded the race, and it was a great race for me personally, better than I usually tend to do in these big races. But I was debating about whether to actually upload it, because although it was exciting for me, there is not a lot of action in the front. Now, all the action happens in the rearview mirror behind me, but it wasn't an overly exciting race, and I was debating about whether to upload it, and then something occurred to me, and that is that I argue that my channel is more for beginners than experienced drivers. I kind of want to have the attitude, because I'm trying to improve all the time, to kind of bring all my viewers and subscribers along with me, and let's all try and improve, just get better generally, and any advanced drivers that do happen to watch can also throw in their tips and tricks that they've learnt as well. But my goal of course is to become one of those alien drivers, so I'm thinking of Play Everything and Ferrari Men 601 and even Mike Smith over at SimRacing 604, although you know we're arguably more on even terms and we have that kind of friendly channel rivalry going. So then let me now talk about the what I would call 3 phases of racing. There's many more parameters within that, but essentially it's the 3. 2 of which I covered in this video, and that's why I was debating about uploading it, but it's a good way to actually show you what I'm talking about. And so the first stage I want to talk about in those 3 stages of racing that I actually don't cover in this video is generally what you might call racecraft. Now that's the hardest thing to learn, and it's just about racing close together and where to position yourself, and the only tip I can give on that is, you know, it just takes hours and hours of practice and a lot of watching of racing on TV. I've found that that's really helped me. So an example in my case in Australia, I watched the V8 Supercars the whole season, and I'm not sure if it's a worldwide term, but in Australia we call it the undercut. So an example of that is where a driver is say in 2nd place and the 3rd place driver goes to overtake him, but in order to overtake, they have to put themselves in a bad spot. And so what the lead driver does is realizes he's going to be overtaken, almost at times slows down deliberately with the idea that when they hit the corner and he gets overtaken, he takes a better line out of the corner, because the guy behind, in order to do the passes, come in way too hot, so often has to kill his speed. And then the driver that's now got the lead taken away from him comes out of the corner beautifully and just maximizes the acceleration out of the corner so well that he retakes the lead. And they're the types of things that you would generally call racecraft. Just positioning of the car when you can't do a smooth lap, and how best to manipulate other traffic to your advantage. And now the second and third things that I want to cover are in this race. So the second one is arguably the most important, and so let me set this up. I've mentioned plenty of times before that I race with my brother once a month. We get together and do sim racing, but it's always the same thing. We select a track and car and we try and hot lap it to get the best lap we possibly can by the end of that afternoon. And the one way we do that is we race against the ghost car. But what we have both learnt, and trust me, it is very hard to do because we both still make that mistake, but when we are getting down to 1/100ths of a second improvement on the lap time, is we coach each other when, so like where the person's sitting next to the person actually doing the racing, and we say to each other, don't race the ghost car. In other words, don't race to the point where you see the car in front and you're so focused on chasing the car that you come into the corners too hot or use too much acceleration or things like that. You overdrive. And so one thing I want you to see in this race is, and I don't mind giving away the race results because it's not overly, so exciting. But what happens is I qualify 4th. I managed to get in later on in 3rd spot, but 2nd spot is not close to me. So I'm ignoring or able to ignore the racecraft side of it. And what I do, instead of focusing on the second car and maybe overdriving, is I start to treat it like I'm just hot lapping. So all I focus on is where my brake points are, the correct line into the corner, and I don't even worry about the car in 2nd spot. And what this does is, if you watch the lap, I'll deliberately have the lap counter on, you'll see that I actually, if done successfully, I managed to break each lap do a faster time that ends up on the last lap of a 6-lap race, doing my personal best, so overall personal best in this car and track on the last lap, which is the way it arguably should be, because it's a short enough race where tyre degradation doesn't come into it. So if I've got the least fuel and I'm as long as you can try and be consistent, so that's what you're aiming for, is to be consistent. But I can then manage to just look at my brake points, get my hot lap timing as good as I can, and then you just improve little by little, rather than chasing the car in front, and maybe because your eyes are focused on that car, you don't realise you've passed your braking point, you come into the corner too hot and you muck the whole thing up. And so now we get to the third stage, which is arguably the most controversial stage because it starts the most arguments, but I'm willing to cop that on the chin. But for beginners, I'm talking about they're two very, very different drivers, but the drivers that I think of when I think of this situation is Ayrton Senna in F1 circles, and the winner of our V8 Supercars last year, Jamie Whincup. So the argument is, what happens is I managed to get into second place because the lead car hits a back marker, and I'll show you that in the replay, different angles using the external camera. But what happens is he naturally crashes out, but he's still able to keep going, and I end up in second place. Now you could argue, and that's the Ayrton Senna argument about just almost not to knock Ayrton Senna, but that winning at all costs kind of attitude, that you just don't give up the lead. But what happens is I look in the mirror and I can see that car coming. Now this is the car that led the race the whole time, and I know within myself, or I accept more importantly within myself, my own abilities. And I realise that he's coming up fairly quickly on me, and he was the lead driver. I won't have the skill to argue the point. Now, maybe sure I could hang on, but my attitude is that Jamie Whincup won the series last year in our V8 supercars, not necessarily because he won the most races, because a different driver actually won the most races, but because he never finished lower than 5th. And the reason that he didn't do that was he didn't take these stupid risks. Now, so my attitude is that I could argue the point for second spot, but what I could also do is crash us both out. So I not only end the guy behind me's race, but my own race, and finish 20th, or however many were in the actual field. But I still managed to finish 3rd, because I said I cannot beat this guy, and you'll see when he passes me I don't have the speed to catch him. But in that racecraft sense, it does allow me to get behind him and get sometimes we get a little bit of just a bit of break, and I catch him to a certain extent and then try and put pressure on him to make a mistake. Now he's a good enough driver that he doesn't, and he ends up winning the race. And that only backed up to me that I have to accept my ability, but it keeps me in the race. So yes, okay, I got 3rd instead of 2nd, but it meant that I actually finished in 3rd. And when you're talking racing in leagues and all that, that can be an important thing to learn. So I hope you enjoyed these few tips and study the race from that point of view, and I hope you enjoy it. And so this is Michael signing out for SingleRacer. I'll catch you next time, and I'll say see you for now, and let's go racing.